Hey, sixth grade. Welcome to your very first video lecture about scientific method. I'm actually going to break scientific method up into smaller parts so it'll be easier for you to understand. And we will also be practicing each part in class together. Okay, so this is just the first time, and I'm going to click that off for just a second so you can't see me, but this is about the scientific method. Okay. Okay, so what is the scientific method? The scientific method is a series of steps that scientists use to solve a problem or answer a question. They use common sense, they use logic, they use their background knowledge, and all those things to help them. So it's not just a crazy wild plan. They're like, oh, let's do this. Let's, play with this equipment. Let's do a lab. Let's do an experiment. It is a little bit different. Okay. There is actually a process that we go through to follow the steps of scientific method. Sometimes scientific method is also known as scientific inquiry or scientific investigation. That's what the little AKA stands for, also known as AKA. Okay, so the scientific method, a series of steps that scientists use to help them answer questions and solve problems. Okay. All right, and the great thing about scientific method is anybody can do it. Even you can do it. You and other scientists are using it every day to answer questions and solve problems because it's like logic. So anytime you solve a problem, solve a puzzle, answer a question, figure out a difficult question, in some way you're following the scientific method. So it will not be completely foreign to you. It will be something that you've done, just you maybe haven't given it the name scientific method. Okay, now scientific method, we're going to talk about 7 different steps in scientific method. Here they are on the screen. The first one is make an observation. 2 is ask a question. 3 is write a hypothesis. Sometimes you'll hear formulate a hypothesis. 4 is to plan and conduct the experiment. 5 is analyze and interpret data that you collected in your experiment. 6 is to draw a conclusion. And 7 is to communicate your results. You want to let other people know about your experiment, what you discovered, what your data said, things like that. Now we're going to go through each one of these steps individually, so don't worry if you don't understand what they are now. You will, okay? And if you also notice, I have put a W next to some of the steps in parentheses. I want you to realize that there's a lot of writing in science. So the writing in science is a little bit different than what you would experience typically in your English classroom. Same thing with the reading that we've been doing. Content reading is a little bit different than reading a novel. And so you have to actually practice. You have to learn how to write a good scientific question. You have to learn how to write a hypothesis. You have to learn how to write out the steps in an experiment in your procedure, and to make it easy for everybody to understand. Anybody could pick up your procedure and follow it. So that takes practice. You have to have that skill of being able to write a procedure and experiment. Okay. When you draw a conclusion after your experiment, that is a definite writing skill and is a little bit different than other things that you'll be writing in other classes. So we're going to practice these things specifically for science. The same thing with communicating your results. Whether you give a presentation or whether you write a lab report, whatever, there's going to be writing involved. Okay, so let's start with the very first step of scientific method. We're only going to do a couple of the steps for this video, and then we will do the other ones in some other video sections, okay? So the first step in scientific method is to make an observation, to notice something. So anytime you use your senses to observe, to view something in the world around you, or to notice something in the world around you, whether it's using your vision or your sense of smell or taste, though we don't really recommend that you taste things in science lab. Maybe it's something that you hear, or maybe you feel something like it's a change in temperature. Like this room is really, really cold, right? So that's an observation that you've made about the room using your senses. All right. Now I'm going to tell you an observation that I made, and that is about my Diet Root Beer. I love Diet Root Beer. I love it. It's like my favorite soda to drink. And so I like to drink my Diet Root Beer really, really cold, like not freezing, but almost. Okay. And so I noticed that my Diet Root Beer really wasn't as cold as I like for it to be. And for me, that's a problem. Okay. So after I make this observation, then we go into the next step of scientific method, which is to ask a question or identify a problem. Okay, so with my observation, I identified a problem, and that problem was that my soda wasn't as cold as I wanted it to be. Okay, so after you make an observation like that and you're curious about how you could solve that problem or answer that question, then you start to use your background knowledge. You start to use you start to do research about that topic to figure out as much as you can, understand as much as you can about that topic. Okay, and the main reason for that is because when you get ready to ask your question, a good scientific question is based on those observations. It's based on your background knowledge. It's based on new knowledge that you've gained through research and your curiosity. Okay, so after you've made an observation and you've identified the problem and you ask a question, then you're ready to go on to the next step. But here's an example with the Diet Root Beer. So I have here, which cooling method will get my Diet Root Beer, sorry, it'll go away in just a second. Okay, so which cooling method will get my Diet Root Beer the coldest without freezing? Okay, so I don't want it frozen, but I want it as cold as possible without freezing. So my question is, which cooling method, like the way that I cool my soda, which one is going to get my root beer the coldest, the fastest, without freezing it? Okay, so we'll come back to that in just a second. Okay, so before we go to the next step in scientific method, which is to formulate a hypothesis or write a hypothesis, we got to learn about variables. So I'm going to end this video here, and then the next video section will be all about variables, because even though variables are not like an official step within the scientific method, you have to understand variables in order to write a good hypothesis, in order to plan a good experiment. Okay, so we're going to stop here for now, and then we'll pick up with variables when we come back. All right, great. Thank you.